different John Wang since there
I
are so
know.
many of us, right? So like I remember asking someone recently, there was a John Wang on the mayoral transition team. I was like, oh my god, did someone tap me without me knowing? And turned out there's like a ton of John Wangs. So someone may be tuned in to hear about the mayoral transition too.
Yeah, exactly. The world according to any John Wang you might know.
Right.
So this is great. And we have a lot of folks who are really on time, and we'll just give it a couple more minutes. So welcome to this special edition of a MOCA program. And we are still celebrating Lunar New Year, even though it was already Lantern Festival and and Tangyuan Night or whatever you want to call it. We're still doing it because we feel like the virtual, you got to do two for every one live program. So we're just continuing on. We're going to rock this all year. Oh, yay. We have one of our special spotlight series. Bill Louie just joined, renowned architect. Thank you for joining. This is so fun. Yeah, they're definitely John Wong fan club people here. I feel it. And since you're for those of you who copped on early, make sure you get the book, the official book. The World Eats Here. And that's John's amazing new book. And we're putting up a couple local bookstores. If you haven't checked out the new bookshop in Chinatown, please take a look. We'll put up the information on the website, on the chat. We'll wait for a couple more minutes, but feel free if you have questions as John and I are chatting, put them in the chat, the Q&A, and we will throw them in. We have so many questions for you. I have like a laundry list of questions. Like, I don't know if I want to start with food, with queens, with your crazy academic background. Like, there's all kinds of stuff. Yeah, You and Me Books. Go to You and Me Books if you want to. I'm sure they have. They actually did. I was there the other day and they had your book.
Oh yeah, that's good.
So that was fun.
It was very, I mean, it sort of came out at the very onset of the pandemic in the US. And so it was, I don't know, a year and a half until my wife saw it in a physical bookstore, just because, all the bookstores are closed and you can get them delivery. So, publisher made us buy a lot of bookcases of them. So I've seen hundreds of copies, but only a handful like in bookstores because, going in was off limits for a while.
Well, we're going to hopefully get it out there even more, now. And we want to, I know you have a ton of new projects, so we'll talk about that too. So we're just respecting those who are on time. We're going to start the program, and we are also doing this Facebook Live. But I'm Nancy. I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the Museum of Chinese in America, and I'm joined by my colleagues. But Neil Wu Gibbs, who's director of programs and pretty much everything else. We give him the key to the museum at any time. And we have great folks on the call. But John Wang is amazing. We were just joking before, if you hadn't heard, how many John Wangs do each and every one of you know? We know a lot of John Wangs. So often gets mistaken, especially in New York City, when there are a couple of pretty notable John Wangs doing really great work. But this is the one and only Queens Night Market John Wang. And I want to start off by just saying, we were talking about, how you started the Queens Night Market and how it kind of put Queens on the map. And I remember after you started it, it got some publicity. People said, oh, Nancy, did you hear about the Queens Night Market? I know you're from Flushing. And they're like, Queens is going to be the new Brooklyn. And I just I just got so tensed up because Queens doesn't want to be the new Brooklyn, everyone. Queens just wants to be Queens. And so John, why Queens? Why Flushing Meadow Park? And what was like the whole genesis of that? And we'll work backwards into your like insane academic background.
Sure. I do want to clear up the record. They're not all, John Wangs are not all good out there, because I remember in 2017, I think, some reporter called me and asked me for an inside scoop on something he was doing. And he was asking me all these bizarre questions about like campaign lobbying and finance. And I was just like, I can give you, because, at the time I thought I was the only John Wang in the world. And so I was just telling him like my personal opinion on these bizarre, random, non sequitur questions he was asking. And then his sort of last question, he's like, all right, how's it feel to be out of prison? I'm like, what? Sorry? And it's like, aren't you the lawyer who was like indicted for XYZ? I was like, oh, no. Can you strike the record of everything I just said? Because that's clearly not me. So there's some bad apple John Wangs out there, I think. So why Queens? Oh, there's sort of the symbolic, there's the theoretical, and then there's the practical answers, and it's sort of a mix of all three of those. When I started planning for this idea in 2014, it was I was thinking about moving to New Orleans for all sorts of reasons. I'd been in New York for a very long time, and the hustle and the grind. I was no longer a lawyer, so the paycheck was gone. So I was trying to figure out what to do, and I thought if I stayed in New York City, I would do one crazy, crazy thing, and if it went belly up, then I would feel fine and still move on to maybe New Orleans or somewhere else. So I thought, why don't I try to create New York's first night market? And at the time, there was one in LA called the 626 Festival, and then there were two sort of competitors in Vancouver. One was called like I think Summer Night Markets, and one's called One's called Vancouver Night Market, one's called Richmond Night Market, something like that. But that was basically it. And I, beyond me, why, and I spent a year sort of looking into it, and thought I would spend that year. And when I got to the idea, I was like, okay, where in New York can you actually have this thing? And I did not want, I did not want this little strip of street or like 10 vendors, and that wouldn't make quite the impact I wanted. And besides, I had agreed to spend a crazy year trying to do this, so I had to dream as big as possible to make it worthwhile. So, anyways, I literally spent, I don't know, probably several days on Google Earth, zooming in for every square foot that looked like it was not a building in New York City. Um, and then eventually, it sort of dawned on me, the huge space of Flushing Meadows, and it has, the history of the World's Fairs. At the time, Queens's motto, I think this was 2014, was starting to be, world's most diverse place. And I know that other cities sort of also try to claim that unique pedestal. But so basically, it's sort of all triangulated into, it had the square footage in Flushing Meadows that I needed, had the World's Fairs, which really spoke to the international diverse nature of what I was trying to do, and also Queens being according to some, the world's most diverse borough, just made a lot of sense. And if you haven't been to the Queens Night Market, it's not quite an Asian themed night market. It's sort of the other thing that kept me in New York City to do this was, I think I could have created a Asian night market at almost any big city in the U.S. because there's usually such a big Asian community. But to me, one of the greatest things about New York City is its tremendous diversity, and I think there's something like 135 nations represented here, or something like that. So, the night market concept I pretty much ripped off of Asia, but what I wanted to do with the vendors and the curation and the representation in the Queens Night Market, it was uniquely New York, I thought. So, in order to do that diversity, I thought Queens made a lot of sense.
That's so funny. You're like, I ripped off the night market from Asia, the continent. And by the way, he's drinking red wine, but it is National Margarita Day. So for those of you who want to really be legit on the holiday celebration, it is National Margarita Day. And a spicy margarita is practically Asian American cuisine at this point. But you know what? You're saying it so lightly. And, for those of you who are from Queens or from Flushing, like I am, I roll my bike around Flushing Meadows Park every day for 6 years, from like when I was 5 and could ride a bike until I was, 12, and before I got busier with stuff. And it was sleepy. It was always very sleepy. It was a place where you saw people playing soccer, football. You saw some South Asian Americans, playing, different types of activities and gathering for picnics. And you didn't even see a lot of Chinese Americans there because it was sort of like you didn't know quite what to do with Flushing Meadow Park. And because it kind of opens up into Corona, also opens up to Jewel Avenue. There are all these different ways to get in, none of them very safe to get in because of the traffic flow. So you're saying like, yeah, it made a lot of sense. The World's Fair was there. I mean, the buildings of where the restaurants were, in the center of Flushing Meadows Park, the restaurant was gone. The theater wasn't yet renovated. Like it was, right. There was nothing really going on there that made it so obvious. So John, I just want to make that note that you're like, yeah, it made a lot of sense. I Google, but it didn't make sense. And that's why you're so awesome. But we got to go back. Like you have 3 undergraduate degrees. you went to Yale Law School. Then you're like, you picked up an MBA at the School of Management. Like, what exactly is going on there, John? And then now, you're like this, a food entrepreneur, innovator, author. So can you give us a little bit of like the honest sort of rundown on like, I was confused or I was, I've heard multiple interview answers, but I want to hear it from you now.
I think I've been pretty consistent. Every time I picked a path to go down, I think I'd realize very quickly that it wasn't for me. But I have a hard time sort of picking up and quitting before I finished. And I was telling, I sort of joke with my wife that whether it's a book or a movie, even if like 5 minutes in, I despise it, think it's the worst thing, like I have to finish it no matter what, just because I started it. So I felt that same way about degrees and various projects that I take on. So it was really, when I started undergrad, I was a terrible, terrible high school student too. I was like failing out of all my classes and constantly skipping school and going to detention to make up for it in Texas, where I grew up. Sort of in my high school years, they instituted this rule that if you missed more than 10% of your classes, you had to make up the time, but you would make them up in detention. And the cool thing about it is you would just make up the time and no one would teach you, and you could just like go there and sleep after class. So I would skip like the day of class and then go to school for the detention and just like sleep or read a book or something. So I was not a great high school student. So it was actually hard for me to get into a good college. But at some point, but I was always a pretty good test taker, and like academics, I was pretty good at. So I started off with a chemistry degree or chemistry. Yeah, I was going after a chemistry degree, and then decided I hated labs, so transferred that into mathematical physics. Mathematical physics degree. I started a philosophy degree and biopsychology and cognitive science. So those are the 3 degrees, and not because I some inkling of interest in each of those, but also like, have a hard time deciding what I actually wanted to do, and then compound that with inability to quit once I started. So that's how.
Okay, everyone's like rolling their eyes on this guy can say that. And you did that all in 4 years at Michigan, right?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, just a little here and there. And like, no, so were you eating throughout this time? Was like culinary arts something on your radar? Were you taking cooking classes and?
Yeah. No. It's pretty funny. I actually just, not to toot my own horn, but I just finished writing an article for the University of Michigan Alumni magazine, where I've taken over the food column. And a lot of it is about, I grew up literally eating fast food, Popeyes, actually not Popeyes, but like back then in Texas, it was Church's Chicken, KFC, McDonald's, Burger King. And, throughout college, the first few years was probably a lot of that. And then I got in close with some traveling, visiting professors from Europe. And then, these European dinner parties sort of took off. And I think that is where I started experimenting with food or taking it somewhat seriously. But I always sort of quibble about being a food entrepreneur or any sort of entrepreneur in the first place. But I like eating as much as anyone else, but I'm not. I don't know. I don't think I have any great insights on it. I sort of treat it on the one hand as a great, bridge to other people and other cultures. But I also just I'm happy with a Big Mac, as happy with a Big Mac as I am, some Peking duck or something.
Yeah, right. I just feel like that, your whole like tenacity in your character that you kind of, sort of are self-deprecating about. But at the same time, I just remember the I don't know if it was the first year where the logistics around the night market were like challenging. Was it the first year? It was the first year, I think.
Well, right? I mean, they were challenging in both, but the second year, the opening night of the second year is when I got death threats.
Right. I was like, when did you get those? Yeah, it was the second year, right?
It was the second year.
And I was just thinking, like, instead of like backing down from it, you just kind of, you like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
I mean, what really doesn't kill you? I mean, hopefully, right?
Literally doesn't kill you. So like, just, is this something, just going back a little bit on your immigrant journey, your parents' journey, like going to Texas and all, can you tell us a little bit about just like the makeup of like the dinner table? Were you guys having a soup and 2 dishes and a bowl of rice and kind of like finish your plate, it's going to end on your wife's face type of family?
Wow. It's a bizarre. So my father left town sort of for work purposes when I was pretty young. And my mother is not a huge disciplinarian. And whatever the kids really wanted to do, she didn't make too much of a fit. So at some point we would eat. I think we started off when I was a kid eating dinner at the dinner table, and then eventually my older brother and I would started eating in front of the TV. And we were kind of, we didn't always microwave our food, but we were pretty much TV dinner folks at some point. And then part of it was just as a matter of fact, if I played football for a year, but it was always sort of after school sports and kind of stuff. And so my parents used to eat pretty early, like 5 or 6. And by the time I'm getting home from, practice or skipping school, it's already, late. And so they've already eaten, my mother's already eaten, my brother's already eaten. So basically everyone just sort of ate themselves. And so, yeah, it was not very structured in, I think, in any way you would consider traditional. But maybe it's a suburb thing or a Texas thing, or also where we grew up. I think there was not another Asian kid in my grade for many years, right? So we definitely didn't feel the pressure to sort of keep those ties or sort of keep that heritage and traditions. Nor did I think my mother have the will raising 3 sons to sort of like impose it either. Like I think she had busy keeping us alive. So chose her battles, I feel like.
That sounds, like a good Salisbury steak and an apple pie is nothing to see.
Salisbury steak was my brother's favorite. Oh my God. That, like, I think it was called Nighthawk was the brand.
Yeah,
like, oh my God. He was obsessed with
And
it.
then you got the hungry man. It's a little bigger. I think, a lot of us folks in Queens definitely grew up on that stuff. But it's interesting because when you kind of zigzagging around, and I know you got so much, it is like sort of like you land in the New York Times and it's kind of like the world sort of opens up. And I mean, that happened to MOCA with the fire, just kind of like opened up.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're like out there. And then, for you and the Queens Night Market, which again is one of those, I just want to underscore, I want to underscore, and this is, you might, you're so modest, like just being from someone from that neighborhood, I just felt like it was so genius. Like it's so obvious, and yet it was so not obvious. And I remember I met you about 6 years ago with one of our board members, Greg Ho, who was like, you've got to meet this guy. He's doing this insane thing. He's doing night market in Queens. And I was like, I know the continent of Asia, and like, yes, they're at the night market in Taiwan, and you're doing this at midnight. So my first thought was like, oh my goodness, he's taking vendors out at midnight, because that's, and then I thought the night markets like in Taipei and Kaohsiung, and those of you from Taiwan, they're super, super safe.
Yeah.
People are just strolling in their like pajamas and like slippers and stuff. And it's a very much like a sansampu like sort of thing. And you're getting a skewer and stuff like that. And I had these visions of when he said night market and when we met, what it was before I knew what it was. And so you had to adapt it to Queens. You had to adapt it to New York City. And I'm just wondering, since we've been through these last 2 years where everyone on this call and the museum and everybody in the world has had to pivot really, really, really quickly, I was wondering if you could just tell us like a little bit of the horror of all that pivoting you had to do, because we kind of got a hint of it in the write-ups. But how insane was it for you? And have you thought about COVID and like constant pivoting, like your book, just like not showing up on the books, like all this stuff, like you've got 10 years of pivoting. We've got 2 years of pivoting and on the call and stuff.
Yeah.
You've basically had 10 years of pivoting. Like, so can you tell us a little bit about like maybe your fatigue level? I mean, like, how did you do this, and what, were you prepared for all that came onto you?
So I guess I'll go chronologically from the beginning to like then to the pandemic. But I always, or I don't always, but I often say I think that not having any experience in this was like a blessing, right? So there have been markets in New York City, obviously forever and ever, and there huge tons and tons of event promoters, and we have like musical elements at the event, and we have like art elements and all this stuff. And I was in completely naive. I had no idea about any of it, and I did some Google research and I went to visit some other markets. But at the end of the day, I didn't want to be bound by those things because I had my own vision. And part of the thing you kept running into is like that just would never work, right? Like the idea of a price cap on food in New York City would never work, and the idea of like opening till midnight would never work, and everything would never work. And to me, maybe I'm just delusional, but I just didn't believe it, right? And I think that's probably true with anyone that does something like new. Again, the concept is not trademarkable or any sort of IP, but it was just like, well, you don't understand, and people often it's like, okay, well, what's a night market? And you're like, oh, it's a market at night. And they're like, I don't get it. I'm like, okay, well, I know it's hard, hard to explain. Like, but once you go to like, and again, I don't want to sell short. Like, Marrakesh has an amazing night market, and so like, but if you go there or you go to Hong Kong or Taiwan or Thailand, like, you get it once you get there because it sort of feels to me what I liked so much about it. The games as a kid I loved, but then like going back as an adult, it sort of feels like it's democratic in a way that's everyone eats at the communal tables and you don't necessarily wonder who's sitting next to you. And the same thing I felt about New Orleans, which I loved, is you could be sitting next to an oil tycoon or a homeless person and you may not know the difference or you may not care. And that's how I always felt about night markets, and that was what I was trying to bring to New York. And so yeah, I don't know. One major thing that I hope one day in 10 or 20 or 30 years happens is like night markets become part of the city infrastructure, right? That's sort of what happens in Asia, except, minus the ones that have been built structures for them. But historically, they sort of just popped up in the city and you got over hundreds or thousands of years. And the Queens Night Market now is still sort of a special destination, which I would love. I don't want to be the one to change that and make it a sort of integral part of the city, because I'll probably be long dead when that happens. But that's something I do aspire want to happen. I don't know, lots of pivoting. I guess that was a short way of saying, like, I'm not sure I pivoted so much at the beginning, just because I had my vision and I refused to make too many compromises on that vision. But for sure, and also the pandemic, did I pivot during the pandemic? The Queens Night Market has to be in person, right? In terms of like the feeling and experience. So as long as that couldn't happen, there was like no pivoting. I did tons of projects on the side during the pandemic to sort of support vendors and keep busy. And one we worked on, we did terrible tech problems, but we did the 5 boroughs or Queens census drive, where we enlisted like 60 partners to do census outreach on a given day. And we did, I did cooking demos with vendors. We raised money to feed healthcare workers, that kind of stuff. But none of them, I feel like they weren't pivoting our concept or business model as much as like pivoting my personal life, maybe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. And it just seems like, yeah, go ahead.
No, but the thing that we had speculated for a year, the first year of the pandemic, like the pent up demand for outdoor events and was like sort of volatile, right? Like it was about to explode at any point. And so when we did finally get the okay to open last year, it was nuts. Like not quite our second year in terms of opening night, but more people than we'd seen in 5 years, and people were so happy to be there, and people were supporting vendors like I had never seen. So yeah, I don't know, that's definitely not a case of pivoting, but just catering to the pent up demand. So last year for vendors was a phenomenal year.
And they needed it too.
Yeah, they definitely
really did. And like that open air concept actually end up being the main choice, right? The safest choice. So I just kept thinking of how fortuitous all that was. It wasn't like because if you hadn't done it previously, right, when it wasn't COVID, it would have been really tricky to figure it out in last year. And yet it kind of all worked out, and you had the model, and it really helped support vendors, over 100 vendors. And it was this great expansive space where people could really hang out for hours.
It was also funny that last year, and maybe it just happened to coincide with the new political election cycle, but people that had never ever paid attention to the Queens Night Market in the previous 6 years were coming out in 2021 in droves. Like I think every political candidate in New York City and New York State was there, sort of like campaigning. And um, I'm not sure where they were in the previous 5 years, but all of a sudden, people were treating it like someone had said after the first night we opened was like, that was like the Iowa State Fair. That was crazy.
So
I think
funny.
it's Iowa State Fair. I hope
Yeah.
I'm not getting my primary wrong.
But, for a lot of people on the call, I think they are New Yorkers, and we all grew up saying the city, right? The city was Manhattan, and there was no
Right.
other borough that was part of the city, and it was like this irony. But we all sort of kowtowed to Manhattan as the city, and the outer boroughs as just sort of like tag-alongs. It really, just as a reminder to everyone, it really wasn't until the contemporary sort of late 2000s that we really saw Brooklyn kind of coming back on the map. It was like after the Lower East Side, then you saw parts of Williamsburg and Dumbo, and that was all sort of new, and the waterfront get out. So all of this is really, really new, where, places like, with, I just looking at the city and its evolution, it does feel like the Queens night market really bumped up. Queens also as a destination, and then Flushing, and then development, in the last 5-6 years has really gone crazy in Flushing, and Helen Lee and F&T group with the Tangram project, and there's so much activity of really Flushing and that outer area of Queens being this diverse, international yet local hub.
Yeah.
Of it all. And it just seems like it's been orchestrated, and yet it hasn't. It's been very entrepreneurial and innovative, like how you think and how you operate. So I guess I'm wondering, like, for you, is this a long gig, or is it like your career now, and have you found your passion?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, when I started in 2014, started chasing after it in 2014, I honestly, probably another reason I hesitate to call myself an entrepreneur. I did not look past a year because I was pretty sure that within a year it would die. And if you look at any statistic of a small business trying to start in New York City, like the odds are stacked against you. So I'm not a delusional. I don't think I'm delusional. So I was like, there's a really, really good chance after a year that this will bust. And that's fine because I was no regrets. I dedicated a year to do something crazy anyways. So I never looked past the year, and even now, every year I do it. I honestly am like, okay, next year's got to be the last one because this is exhausting. And before I met my wife and we recently had a baby, for like the first 5 years of the night market, I worked every single day on it, like 365 days a year. Writing emails, thinking about it, cold calling, cold emailing for something or other, and that was very exhausting. So, but what kept me in it, I think, was just how many lives I think we've touched. Like, again, I don't want to make it sound like it's the panacea for anything, but we've helped start something like 350 businesses in New York City. Not all still exist because still the odds are stacked against you. But 350 businesses formed companies because of the night market. We've had now something like almost 2 million visitors, and it's not just people passing through. I think people really engaging and sort of eating things they've never eaten before and asking questions about cultures they've never asked before, which was kind of the whole point. And so a long way to say, like, I think a lot of people have bought into it in a way that I feel weird walking away from. So I honestly don't know if it's long term. I would love to find someone who could carry it on forward, because look, I have, again, I don't think the concept is not patentable. I didn't do anything didn't take any special skills. I didn't invent something. But what I do feel strongly about is the sort of the social mission that we hold dear and hold on to adamantly. And so if someone came along and said, like, I promise to carry on this passion for diversity and affordability and accessibility, I'd probably hand over the keys that day, to be honest, if I thought they would do it. Because people have asked, like, are you selling the night market? We'd love to put like some company that produces marathons, like sports rock and roll marathons or something, once asked me if I was interested in selling. I'm like, so you want to put, like, I don't know, Hard Rock Cafe night market on it or something? They're like, maybe, we just want to explore the options. And I'm like, all right, that's probably not where I want it to go. So I'd rather, I mean, quite honestly, I'd rather the Queens night market sort of die than take on some sort of weird corporate form that doesn't live up. But on the other hand, and if it died, I think I was mentioning to you that there are literally hundreds and hundreds of events that I think we've inspired across not only the U.S. but around the world. Right? There was a time when I was getting calls from Russia and Australia and France, like, "Oh my God, we read about the Queen's Night Market. Can you do something like that here?" And to this day, there are no employees. Right? It's still just me, so it's not like I could be two places at once. But so like the legacy, and I think a lot of it was inclusivity and diversity and affordability. Like obviously those are, everyone talks about those things, but it's really hard to make work, and it's so hard to make work is why I don't have employees, because it's super hard to make work. But it's sort of have some legacy, I think, that is bigger than whatever I put into it. And so I think it's fine. So I don't think it's a long term thing. Like I don't think, to be honest, I think in 3 years, I don't even think my wife will let me be at it in 3 years. But yeah, but I hope. I mean, I for sure hope it lives, and like someone takes it over and can pay it, do it justice or something like that.
That's interesting, because I was just thinking, I've done a couple of those rock and roll,
Uh-huh.
marathons and half marathons. And every time I'm running it, I keep thinking, wow, I would really like some more rock and roll. So if it's your night market, you have to make sure they're doing it enough to like live by the name. But that's just an aside. A lot of people have questions about logistics, and I'll just pick up all of them so you can answer them together,
Sure.
which is like, is it coming back? It looks permanently closed. If it comes back, is it going to be a 5 o'clock opening? And also, how did you select the vendors? And was it like, okay, yeah, this sounds great, or was it more, tangible?
Yeah. So I'll start with the easy question, which is how does the vendor curation work? So the idea when I started the night market was to represent as many countries as possible that are here in New York City, or sort of, so to date, we've had something about 95 countries represented through our vendors and their food, which is, I think, that's probably one of the things I'm most proud about, is that 95 countries is a pretty big swath of the world. And so the other thing I was fighting against at the time is, food festivals have been around obviously for a while, and a lot of them curate based. To me, my interpretation is they curate based on Instagram virality or Instagrammability, or how cool and quirky and novel can you make something. And to me, that's fine, and there's obviously a huge market for that. But to me, what was more interesting was, I would rather learn about these people and their families through their food. And so the closest proxy I had to that was curating based on family traditions or cultural traditions that people grew up with. So like the line in our application, I think, is something like, we curate vendors selling food that they grew up eating, right? Which sort of, we hope, sort of eliminates some of the French, the Parisian who went to culinary school and realized that tacos are super trendy and sellable, so they decided to start a taco shop, right? Or vice versa. But those are things, like, again, there's a huge market for that, and for good reason, like, but it's just not something that I necessarily wanted to curate. So that's how it works, and how I try to force myself to get to a more diverse representation is I put a quota on no more than 2 countries can be represented at the night market at any given time. So that's in practical how it works. And I also think I'm not a food entrepreneur or curator, because I don't, to be quite frank, I curate based on the stories and not the taste of the food. And the easy answer to why I do that is I hate the list of things I won't eat is kind of notorious. Like, I mean, like, I don't like mayo, and I don't like pistachios, and so like if I were trying to taste test half of these cuisines, like, I'd be like, oh my God, no way, I would never eat that. So one of the reasons I don't taste test always. The logistics of this year, honestly, it's a pretty timely question, because I'm trying to figure that out right now. We're lobbying to City Hall on something really big, which I hope we'll be able to announce. If we can announce it, I hope we'll be able to announce it probably next week, which a lot of things depend on, both the timing and...
Tell this group now, give us a hint.
Yeah, we're trying to move the night market to a sort of more hallowed location, which isn't far from where we are, but would probably be one of the most iconic things. And the easy hint is if you look back at our Kickstarter campaign that failed miserably back in 2015, it was basically where we originally wanted to have the Queen's Night Market. So.
Oh.
A little scavenger hunt.
Northern Boulevard and Main Street?
No.
No? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, someone go do a look, and then basically. So, we're also wondering, the amazing Anthony Bourdain, he was supposedly planning a real ambitious food market.
I'm so funny. Can I believe you're asking that? Yep. Go ahead.
Any thoughts on that? And can you actually, resurrect the idea?
Oh, okay. That's a very, very loaded subject. We were pitching this idea to the media at the exact same time, like his Bourdain Hall and the Queen's Night Market. And look, I watched all of No Reservations. I was a huge Bourdain fan. And to be in the same conversations as Bourdain and his team, where it was pretty incredible. People were like, "Oh, this sounds." So, I'll give you two really quick stories about our intersections, and then maybe that'll be enough because I'm not sure I want to carry on. But I heard when Bourdain and his team were at City Hall trying to pitch Bourdain Hall, the people at City Hall, folks at City Hall, were like, "I don't get it. How's it any different than a food hall?" And then someone on Bourdain's team said, "Okay, well, if you can imagine Queen's Night Market crossed with something else, it was a food hall or something like that." So I didn't hear that. I heard that from hearsay. So someone got out of that meeting from City Hall and texted me "Holy!" Sorry, I was going to use a big expletive, but "Holy crap!" Bourdain's team just dropped Queen's Night Market as an example of what they wanted to do. I was like, "Oh my god, it's so crazy!" Because Bourdain Hall was such clickbait at the time. Everywhere, it was everywhere. And then the other thing, I sort of bittersweet feeling. The last interview I remember reading about Bourdain doing, I think he was in the Philippines, and he was doing some talk show or something, and they were asking what does Bourdain Hall look like, and what's the feel of it, and he directly stole from our marketing tagline. And I don't know if it was intentional or not, but he was we want to make sure it's the most affordable thing that New Yorkers have ever seen, and I want a janitor eating there just as much as a hedge fund billionaire eating there or something like that. I was like, what? That's totally what I've been pushing for 3 years. Anyway, so those were, and then I did cross paths with his team. They did No Reservations. I know he had a passport, or he had another show, but he did one in, maybe it was No Reservations Queens. And he asked me for recommendations of places to go, so I happily gave them. And I asked his team to please credit Queen's Night Market in the credits, and instead he credited John Wang, which I felt a little miffed about. But so anyway, I personally am not huge. I'm not a huge fan of food hall concept in general, but I get that it's there and it makes a lot of sense. I'm personally just so afraid of physical structures because probably the rent that comes with it in New York City. So that's my feeling. I don't know.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, MOCA pays, and that's one of our biggest issues is we've been paying $600,000 in rent every year for 15 years. And it's really hard to sustain something where people can access it, and yet it has
and especially when you're doing something that is sort of for the community and not necessarily if profit is not your motive, that leaves you in a pretty tricky situation, trying to make ends meet but also deliver on your mission is that's for sure. That's similar to what the night market does every year, is trying to balance that. It's tricky.
Right. And so a couple of questions, one from the audience, and then also just, you kind of alluded to this, New York City being pretty tricky to get anything done, and a lot of people sort of using some of the cool stuff that people do, that you do, as sort of that's my Queens thing, or that's this thing, or this is my district thing, or this is that thing. And then you kind of get mired into all this bureaucracy and sort of scratch this, scratch that. It just kind of gets insane. And also it's hard to get things done, doing something especially logistically challenging like what you're doing. just say the word security, and then that's like 1,100 issues. But then also someone did ask, like, what's the business model look like for that? And I mean, were you able to get into the black at any point?
Yeah, it was like 3 years till we got into the black. The business model, like, I handed over like my finances to the Wall Street Journal when they covered it in our second year. There's no secrets. Again, like, I'm an open book. I submitted a proposal to move the night market, as I've been talking about, and like, I laid bare our finances because it's. I mean, I don't see any reason to keep it a secret. The business model is, I figure out what the operating costs, what it'll cost me to operate the Queen's Night Market, and I divide that essentially. I mean, with some slight, customization, but like, divide that up by the number of vendors, and that's how I charge the vendor fees. And then anything else I can try to scrounge, like whether it's the bar, which, I run the bar at the Queen's Night Market, and it does not make very much money. It's amazing how little people drink at the Queen's Night Market if you consider how many people we bring, which honestly is a good thing because we've never had one, alcohol related issue. And, you were mentioning safety and how crazy it is that you can run a huge, massive event until midnight in New York City. And it's sort of, it's some mix of the people that come bring their kids with strollers and the people that come enjoy it and don't feel the need to get blitzed, which is, again, I sometimes probably feel the need to get blitzed some places, but for whatever it is, like, people come and it's like, it's friendly and people are always smiling, and I can't think of a single fight that ever broke out. And I think one kid, once someone's tip jar got stolen, but that's like the extent of the issues like we've ever had, and knock on wood. I'm sort of happy with our crappy bar sales, given that it just runs so smoothly and we have not had any safety issues so far to speak of. And so, like, whether sometimes we'll get, some company wants to buy a corporate tent, and that is a profit maybe in the bar, but that's the way the business model works, is figuring out what I won't lose money on and making sure that trying to get the vendors to cover that, and anything else that comes, like, is technically in the black. So that's how it works.
That's pretty bare bones. And I know you
Yeah,
have, like, you've been
there's no, like, I mean,
but I mean, I think I'm looking at the participant list. I won't call them out, but I know that there are people who were financially sort of supporting, but also excited about the concept. And maybe even there were all those inklings of, like, okay, let's do it in, Jamaica. Let's do it in, I don't know if any of those are true. Staten Island, we can do it in the Bronx, and like,
yeah.
and like trying to scale it.
Yeah.
Like, tell us about the scaling challenge, and also kind of where that ended up.
So we've only once taken the Queen's Night Market elsewhere, and that was to Jamaica. We tried it because the folks in Jamaica were super, super accommodating, and we had a landlord issue at the time, and this was our very first year, and so they have a huge parking lot in Jamaica and asked us if we would consider taking it, and they would cover any losses that we might have incurred doing it. So we went, and to be honest, it was the first 3 nights. This was, I'm sure the history dates back much, much further, but Jamaica was struggling with a sort of brand reputation issue, and maybe they still are, and I would not want to opine on that, but they were really, one of their goals of bringing the Queen's Night Market there was to make it seem safe and sort of get in the news and have a good publicity cycle. So to me, it sounded, it was still Queens, and like, it was a good mission, and so, we convinced a ton of vendors to go to Jamaica. And honestly, the first night there was pretty great. Like, people, we exceeded expectations by huge quantities of people coming. And the problem quickly emerged, though, that all those people that came the first and second night to sustain it were all from out of town, or not out of town, but not from Jamaica. And so they were from Queens coming, or they were from Corona and like Sunnyside. People that had gone to the Queen's Night Market in Flushing Meadows were coming to Jamaica for 1 or 2 nights. And what quickly realized is, like, the local population was not sustaining it. The local residents were not sustaining it. And so, like, it didn't make sense anymore. So that was, I mean, not that I'm bitter about it, because I think it was really a good publicity cycle for them. And, I think we did, and a lot of people came that had never been in Jamaica for 30 years and said it's too dangerous, I'll never go. But they came for the Queen's Night Market, right? So I think that was, at the end of the day, in the balance, it was a good thing. But that was the last time I toyed. And I don't even call it toyed with moving it, but we moved because we didn't have a home and we wanted to do something good for the community. Scale it, and I honestly, Brooklyn's asked me to do something. Staten Island has been asking me to do something. So people have asked. Manhattan has not asked me per se. We do have a little shop outpost at the Rockefeller Center, but nothing near in terms of the scale. So I don't know. Part of it again is when Russia had emailed me. Someone from Russia was like, "Oh, we really want to bring you to Russia and ask you to do something like this." Like, sounds pretty amazing. And in another world, if I had like two of me, I would totally have probably done it and gone. So one of it's just a capacity issue, and two, it's a lot of. I mean, maybe that is still back to a capacity issue. It's a lot of work. Like, I have no problem with, honestly. I think maybe someone on this call, if he's on the call, yeah, he was telling me that there was a politician who was saying we should have night markets in every borough, and to me, that's totally fine, right? Like, whether I can run it or whether I can run all of them or someone else takes them over, that's totally fine. Again, I have no possessiveness over the concept of night markets. Like, as long as people, I think, do it with social values in mind, I'd be happy with there a billion night markets around the U.S.
Yeah, that's the hard part, though, like keeping social values in mind.
Yeah, no, I can see why, though, right? Like, I would love to have employees, but the fact that,
Sure.
what we try to engender runs directly counter and sometimes to the bottom line is tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. And like this has been such a fun conversation, but also I want to like have folks know a little bit about what you're doing. And so you've been plucked. Your name does come up a lot in conversations. Oh, maybe John will do it, because you just become the centralized, like, get crazy logistical things done, get diverse things that are really fun done, get a big event done, and your name just sort of like percolates like right up to the top. Get something done in New York that has something to do with immigrants or diversity. So tell us about the June event, which Mocha's really happy to be a part of too.
Yeah, no, we're super excited that you guys are involved and that you have probably one of the cooler activations so far. So Festival of New York is supposedly happening this summer, May through, I think, September. It's spearheaded by Lincoln Center, and they're trying to get a bunch of basically any organization in New York City that wants to celebrate New York and hopefully New York coming out of the pandemic under the umbrella of Festival of New York. So I volunteered to spearhead a 5-borough celebration of basically immigrants and immigrant heritage and immigrant communities in New York City. And so we are trying to enlist a huge swath of cultural institutions that have a stake in either, again, the immigrant history of New York City or directly in the immigrant communities, to do anything related to celebrating that. And I don't want to spill your beans, so I'll keep quiet unless you want to spill them. But we've got the Queensboro Hall on board, and I think we've got, don't quote me on any of these, but I will just name drop 2 people who I think will end up on board. A Lincoln Center and NYC and Company, Queens Public Library, New York Public Library. I don't know, quite a few others that I won't remember at the moment. But so, anyways, I don't know. Do you want to say what you're planning to do?
We'll keep it on the wraps.
Okay,
we want to make sure when you announce the effort overall that it'll be fun for people to pick and choose. And I think it's we've been around in all this space for a long time. This is the first time I feel like maybe this is the first time Mocha's been invited to it, but something that's actually orchestrated around doing something together with partner orgs. It feels really different, and it's interesting. I feel like sometimes in New York City, because you never know where either opportunity is or funding is, it's like there's a lot of bosses in play. But this one seems like, oh, let's all come together, like let's brainstorm ideas. And I just wish that there was more of that, where we're kind of bringing ideas together to make something work instead of duplicating, which is something that we've talked a little bit about. I mean, copying is a great form of flattery, but at the same time, it's nice to sort of credit the origin story, like Asia, the continent. like we did.
Right.
Yeah, you have this incredible cookbook out that you co-wrote, co-put together with Storm Garner, who's like a big foodie, and writer, and thinks a lot about arts and all kinds of things in the oral history project, but been DC, Paris, New York City. I was curious by some of the reviews I was reading in the run up to this, sort of like suggesting that this is not that it's this global, like they take like the global representation of foods as opposed to this New York City grassroots effort. And I guess I was wondering, what is your hope for this book? The World Eats Here. Is it, and how do you how did you conceive of it? How long did it take to write? But also, do you want it to be something that really represents the diversity of New York City, or do you want it to be something more like the World's Fair in a book?
That's a lot of questions. I'm not sure I'm prepared. And I do want to point out that Storm Gardner, my co-author, is also my beautiful wife. And this is the book. She did most of the words in the book are hers, and she's an amazing writer. And she is working on the oral history project. I'm not sure. To me, it was like a snapshot, and I think there may even be a line from the book, but like to me, it was like a snapshot of the Queen's Night Market, and whatever that means for anyone, right? To me, it means there are, 60, 70, 80, 90 vendors from all around the world who are, ended up here one way or another. As everyone has a sort of compelling personal story, I'm sure I honestly think everyone's is like compelling, and you could write books about everyone's. And just, it's a snapshot. Not all the vendors in the book. Only we couldn't. The book would be ridiculously long if we had everyone in there. And it's really like so. I'll speak a little bit on behalf of Storm, and I think what she did pretty uniquely, given the fact that the narratives in the book were taken from her oral history project, was give all the highlighted vendors, and there's 50 something vendors in the book, and you'll see that they have like the sort of, there's a narrative about them, and then also one or two or three recipes that they find near and dear and decided to offer up. But Storm gave them incredible agency, which is sort of best practices in oral history. Like they got to edit their own content. They got to sort of take out what they didn't want. They got to make confidential what they didn't want, rather than sort of interviewing them and crafting the story however you think it was best. They got complete agency in putting, some of them wanted to put their best foot forward and wanted it to be more of a publicity thing. And some of them backed away and said, oh, that's too political. I don't want to be on the record for that. And so we had to like adjust the editing process for that. So, from Storm's perspective and the stories, I think it's really about showcasing whatever they wanted to showcase from these sometimes 3-4 hour long interviews about their lives. And for me, really, it was just like people had asked me to write a cookbook since probably the second year, and I was not prepared to do it. And just took me off. Probably took too much time, and finally I got to a place when we got in the black. Probably the stress was a little bit off, and the night market was sort of running like a not well-oiled machine, but like maybe half-oiled machine, and like it didn't take 20 hours or 18 hours a day to run. And then it was like, oh well, this is fun and great, and it'd be great to sort of have something in the world semi-permanent. I'm not sure I have a clever or insightful answer to your question, but it won an award, which is great. It didn't have the book sales are terrible, but it didn't win an award. Indie's best Indie Awards best cookbook in 2020. So that was small comfort.
Well, it's like 4.5 stars, 180 reviews, and it's all absurdly exciting. And also, people want to know, what's your favorite recipe in the book?
Never. And I can't. The funny thing about writing your cookbook, right? Like my first one, for sure. Obviously, my first published book. But also like the vendors, 90 maybe 95% of the recipes in the book have never been written down because they've sort of just passed down through the generations orally usually. And so getting some of these non-native English speakers to like give measurements, and Storm did this interview once with one of the vendors, and I won't name which one, but we were trying to get the recipe out of her so we could document it and sort of test it in some ways. We didn't always test them. And she was like, oh, when I came to this country, we didn't have measuring cups, so all we had were Chinese takeout containers, which you might find funny. And so they were like, well, how do you make this recipe? They're like, oh, you take one Chinese takeout container of this, you take a large Chinese takeout container of this, you mix them together, and then add like half a Chinese takeout container of this. And we're like, what the hell are these measurements? Like, we could never like standardize them. But that was her experience, and she was not Asian. She was a Hispanic immigrant. So like her connection to these recipes was that, and Storm had a great kick out of that. But there are a few mistakes in the cookbook. So
don't make all the
mistakes are not my favorites. That's for sure.
Okay. That's good to know. And you might know this, but I looked into the Flesh Meadow Park because my family owned a pizzeria. I don't know if you know.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah. So we had a pizzeria in Corona, in Queens, and it was called New Day Pizzeria, and it was way before California Pizza Kitchen.
Okay.
But we were like throwing, Asian ingredients onto this pizza, and I will say we use MSG because that's just a myth and it doesn't, cause us headaches. But it was, we're pretty proud of it. We were just a little too young to help out enough to make that business sustainable. And I just think like it would have been really cool if my mom had the opportunity to be a vendor at your place, because we could have doled out some amazing like pre-CPK types of Asian infused pizza, which I still think is
MSG,
the best.
That's just don't tell people and it'll fly off like hotcakes.
Yeah, but like duck on pizza, mixing it up a little bit. So you're doing a great, I think, service, especially for more recent immigrants, but also just acknowledging, those who want to keep these recipes, these heirloom recipes for their next generation. And you've basically put them in a place where their children and their grandchildren can access them, as well as the world. So we're super grateful. So forever, this is John Wang, the king of the Queens Night Market. And hopefully you will live on and reign forever. We've so enjoyed having a conversation with you. We have a lot of folks who have joined us live and also on the call-in Zoom. But please buy the book. Please buy the book. The World Meets Here. You can get it on Amazon, but get it definitely more pressingly. Help your local bookstore. There's a great one in Chinatown that just opened up at 44 Mott. You can get a great meal afterwards as well, but also in Flushing, there are a number of new bookstores that have popped up and all over the boroughs. So John, last words.
Yep.
What's your legacy for your 6-month-old daughter? What do you hope for her?
So my wife Storm, who is co-author of the book, wants me to show the baby. Probably get like good points, brownie points from all of you, the like 6 viewers that are watching. Not 6, obviously, but what is the legacy? Honestly, I have no idea. Like, hopefully she does whatever she wants and is happy about it, because that's all that really matters. And what's that?
Has no dietary restrictions.
My wife says hopefully she's not allergic to anything and has no dietary restrictions, which is totally fine too.
I hope she can eat spicy. That's my hope for you.
We're trying to figure that out, because I sweat like mad when I eat spicy food and my wife does not. So we're trying to figure out if she's takes after one of us or ends up in between. But
He's smiling, so I think unless she has gas, we all know that those are very quick, like subtle differences. John and actually your wonderful wife, which we can't see, but the co-author of this amazing book. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And again, buy the book, The World Meets Here, and look out for the June activities that will be wildly publicized. That basically John is a master, puppet master and the orchestrator of in June for immigrants.
Yeah, and if it goes terribly, we'll blame another John Wang, because then I'll just easy to hide. So.
And what's the official title of the program?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're saying something like "This is us." Oh, sorry, that's so funny. This is New York, celebrating our immigrant heritage and communities. But again, it's easier to write than it is to say right now. So we'll see.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and don't forget to get the book. And thanks to John so much for doing this with us.
Thanks, Nancy. Really appreciate it.
Okay, cool.
All right, good luck.
Yeah, take care, everyone.